So today we're going to dive into the effects of porn in your marriage because we can either make ourselves suffer if our partner struggles with porn, or we can find peace in it. And of the hundreds of couples and women that I worked with, or thousands of women that I've worked with, normally it's a very big source of division in their marriage. And so we're going to talk about one, like, how do you even talk about it, right? Is there a way that would serve you to talk about porn in your relationship if it's present? We're also going to talk about maybe roots of it and where it could be coming from, and how I could actually be perpetuating the hurt when it comes to porn, even though I might not be the one that's watching it. And so even before we dive into that, when you think about porn in your marriage, do you have a place of intimacy and trust and connection where you dive into those hard things? Do you even know if your partner struggles in this area? And if they do struggle in this area, do you create a space where you can have the hard conversation and it actually bring you guys closer together, versus you both are just avoiding this because you don't want to deal with the effects of it, right? So first off, before we even dive into it, we would have to know, are you creating a space in your relationship to have these hard conversations? And one of the ways I was able to do that with Skylar was to look at the history of it. So the first thing I wanted to do when Skylar and I talked about porn was make it about me and make it about how he is hurting me. And what I used to say to myself and say to him was, you're choosing that over me. So you have a warm body laying next to you and you're choosing this, right? And one of the therapists that is around our community mentioned that, would you be willing, Jessica, to think that he had this problem before you? And so he had this problem before you, and somehow now that you're married, you're making it about you. And so whether it's your husband or I know there are women that struggle with porn, right? Did your partner struggle with this before you? And are you curious enough to ask about that journey? Because I know for Skylar, he found porn at 12 years old. So at 12 was when he began his journey with porn. And then from there created an addiction and a relationship with it. And we got married when he was 24 years old. So for 12 years before we came together and got married, he struggled with porn. Yet somehow, once we were married, I then made it all about me and took it personal and created more division, right? Because often he would say, Jessica, I don't want this. I don't want to be doing that. And so another very wise therapist that's around our community said, or brought light to, when your husband goes to look at porn or when your wife goes to look at porn, and if they're telling you they don't actually want that, they want to be choosing you, they might be telling the truth. But what they unknowingly don't know that they're addicted to is the state change that happens in it. So one of our therapists in our community said, he gave the husband advice. He said, you can watch all the porn that you want, but the one thing you don't get to do is you don't get to finish. You don't get to jack off to it, right? I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, but you don't get to finish. And the husband's like, why would I do that? The wife was pissed for a second. Like, wait a second, you're giving him free license? And so as they talked about it more, he said, no. It's not that you're addicted to. Somehow you're addicted to the state change that it creates in you. And there was this moment in your early childhood or whenever you came into contact with porn. And often I hear people's stories where where my mom and dad were going through a divorce and I found porn, or I was so upset and I found porn, right? Or I found porn, and it created this state change. And so now unconsciously, when a man or a woman gets in this place and there's a certain feeling that comes, then that somehow in their brain, there's tied, I can change this. So then they watch porn and have a state change, right? Automatically, what I mean by state change is they feel completely different. So they're feeling one emotion, and that emotion often gets linked to this desire of, I'm going to watch this now. And then afterwards, they feel completely different. So they got to avoid this feeling unknowingly that was going on. Does that make sense? So something comes up in them and they've created this pattern in their life where I don't like this feeling, and they might not even be conscious that they don't like this feeling, but then they've linked into it this desire or lust, or, they're like, man, I want pleasure almost. And pleasure is often different than what they were thinking. Someone in pleasure doesn't say, okay, well, I'm going to add more to it. I'm going to go watch porn, right? No, because you're already in it. But there's this feeling that they don't want. They watch it. And then afterwards, when they finish, there's a different feeling that they feel. And so wives or husbands, when we make their porn about us, it actually has nothing to do with us. But it does give us an indication that healing might be needed, because there's something that's being masked by that. There's something that's not being dealt with. So when that comes up, if you struggle with porn, that might be something to pay attention to. When I go to lust, or when I go to want to watch porn, what precedes that? What feeling precedes that? I heard a wife say recently, my husband told me recently, whenever I get into a fight with you, I go into the bathroom and I watch porn. And it just validated this exact thing, that when he got into a fight, he didn't want to feel that. So he'd go watch porn and then felt different afterwards. And so it might not be as much about you as you think it is. And it might not be that they're not choosing you, because if they're talking to you about it, I want you to hear it. If they're talking to you about it, they're choosing you in that. They're saying, I don't want this. I want to connect with you. And so for me as a wife, I had to check in. What do I get out of making it about me? Right? Because that's my responsibility. So Skylar's responsibility was, does he watch it? But my response is my responsibility. And so I know that whenever we do something, even if we don't want to do it, the reason why we keep doing things we don't want to is because we get something out of them. So I got something out of making Skylar's porn addiction about me. And what I got out of it was I got to justify to revenge. I got to justify to pull away. And I got to be right about this story that I'm not lovable. Because inherently in me, I have this story, because up until meeting Skylar, there hadn't been a male figure in my life that's chose me in a deep, deep way to show up in love. And so I had this underlying belief that I'm not lovable. And so I got to be right about my story when I would say that Skylar's watching that, he's not choosing me, and that means that I'm not lovable. So that's a deep, deep thought. But if you'd consider it, I would consider, what do you get out of making it about you, when more than likely this was a struggle that they had before you? So I hope that this helps. I hope that you have insight on porn in your marriage and kind of how to work through it, or how to create a space. I had to separate me from it in order to be even willing to step into the conversation with Skylar and work through as he slowly got rid of porn in his life. So I hope and pray that your husband is on the journey, or your wife is on the journey to removing that and continuing to create deep, deep intimacy in your marriage.